Welcome back, Influence Decoders. We're continuing our Make Money Online Decoded series.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And today, we're taking a deep dive into a story that's fascinating and a little bit of a cautionary tale.
Mm-hmm.
Ever heard of Wake Up Now?
I have, yeah. They were pretty big in the late 2000s. They promised financial freedom, a supportive community, but unfortunately ended up leaving a trail of, well, broken dreams and financial losses for a lot of folks.
Right, so we've got a stack of research here,
Yeah.
court filings, economic analyses, even some psychological studies.
Interesting stuff.
And we're going to use all this to unpack what really makes MLMs like Wake Up Now tick and
Yeah.
why they just keep popping up even today.
Well, yeah. I mean, what's really interesting to me is how the story of Wake Up Now connects to a lot of the wider trends that we're seeing, especially with the rise of social media and the gig economy. And, their tactics, while controversial, were kind of ahead of their time in a lot of ways.
Okay, so let's rewind back to 2009, right? Wake Up Now launches, right on the heels of that 2008 recession.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are feeling really financially vulnerable at this time. Was that part of their strategy, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. They were tapping into, very real anxieties that people were feeling. And they presented themselves as this, as a solution. On the surface, they were offering things like budgeting tools and discount programs.
Right, practical stuff.
Yeah, it sounded practical,
Right.
especially for those struggling.
So they lured people in with this sense of practicality, but then what? Where does the MLM part come in?
Well, the real money wasn't in those products, right?
Right.
It was in recruitment. So they pushed their members to build what they called a downline, which basically means recruiting more and more people under you.
Oh.
And your income was tied to how big and how active your downline was.
The classic pyramid structure. It sounds tempting, right?
Yeah.
Recruit a few friends, they recruit a few friends, and everyone's getting rich.
Yeah, right. Except that's where the math problem comes in. So let's say every member needs to recruit just 3 people to get full commissions, which is what Wake Up Now required. By the 10th level of that pyramid, you'd theoretically need millions of members.
It becomes unsustainable pretty quickly.
Yeah, you just run out of people.
There simply aren't enough people on Earth to sustain that kind of growth.
And even more alarming is that 95% of Wake Up Now's revenue came from recruitment fees, not actual product sales.
That's a huge red flag.
Oh, yeah. Huge red flag.
For any MLM, I think.
For sure.
So that's what ultimately got them in trouble with the FTC, right? Focusing on recruitment over actual product sales.
Yeah. The FTC saw that their business model was essentially a pyramid scheme disguised as a legitimate multi-level marketing company.
Now, something that really stands out to me is how Wake Up Now leveraged social media. They were early adopters, weren't they?
They were, and they really exploited some of those early algorithm changes on platforms like Facebook.
Yeah.
Back then, Facebook was starting to prioritize aspirational content. Things like flashy lifestyles and before and after testimonials that promised this sort of life transformation.
Right. And didn't they also use those private Facebook groups to sort of control the narrative?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Those groups became like echo chambers where members were constantly being bombarded with these success stories and they're shielded from any criticism and encouraged to just recruit more and more people. It amplified their message and made it seem like everyone was winning, which of course wasn't true.
It's fascinating how they managed to exploit, I guess, like the mechanics of social media to their advantage.
Right.
Did they face any pushback for these tactics?
There was some criticism, but they were really good at controlling that narrative, especially within those private groups.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really until the FTC investigation and subsequent legal action that those cracks really started to show.
So we've got this unsustainable business model, savvy social media manipulation.
Right.
But there's got to be more to the story than that, right?
Right.
Like, why were people so drawn to Wake Up Now in the first place?
Well, this is where the psychology of persuasion really comes into play. You see, MLMs like Wake Up Now, they don't just sell products, right?
Yeah.
They sell a dream. And they're masters at tapping into our deepest human needs and anxieties.
Oh, okay.
And they understood that people weren't just looking for extra cash, right? They were looking for the sense of belonging and recognition and control over their lives.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do they do that?
Well, think about it. New recruits were often showered with praise and attention, They were made to feel like they were part of this special community, almost like a family.
Oh, wow.
Now, this tactic is often referred to as love bombing in psychology.
Love bombing.
And it can be incredibly powerful because it creates a strong emotional bond and makes people more receptive to the MLM's message.
It makes sense. People crave that feeling of belonging,
Yeah.
especially during times of uncertainty, like in that, post-recession period.
Right. And it wasn't just about the emotional validation.
Right.
They also tapped into this thing called the sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, okay.
Now, this is the idea that if you've already invested a significant amount of time or money or effort into something, you're more likely to stick with it, even if it's not working out,
Yeah.
because you don't want to feel like you've wasted your investment.
So you're telling me they deliberately fostered this sense of dependence and commitment among their members?
In a way, yes. They made it very difficult to leave, both emotionally and financially. They encouraged members to buy inventory, attend conferences, recruit their friends and family.
Wow.
So the more invested you were, the harder it was to walk away, even when the cracks started to show.
This is getting pretty heavy. Are we going to talk about what ultimately happened to Wake Up Now and the people involved?
Absolutely. But first, I think we need to dive a little deeper into the psychological tactics they used. Because understanding how these MLMs operate on a psychological level is crucial to protecting yourself and others from falling into similar traps.
Influence decoders. If this is starting to sound familiar to you, maybe you've encountered similar tactics in your own life, online or offline. Stay tuned. We'll be unpacking all of this and more right after this.
We were talking about the psychology behind MLMs, and there's another layer to this that's particularly interesting. It's this concept called identity fusion.
Identity fusion. That sounds intense.
It is, yeah. It's basically when your personal identity becomes so intertwined with a group or an ideology that, criticizing the group feels like an attack on yourself.
Wow.
And MLMs are really good at cultivating this kind of fusion. They don't just want you to sell their products, they want you to become a wake up now person. They used slogans, events, even like a specific language and culture
Oh, wow.
to reinforce this idea of being part of something bigger.
So you're not just selling energy drinks or discount travel packages. You're selling a lifestyle, like a community,
Yeah.
an identity.
Right.
It's almost like a cult in a way.
Well, the comparison to cults is often made, and while MLMs aren't exactly cults, there are some similarities, especially in terms of how they use group dynamics and psychological manipulation to control their members.
That's a bit unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I can see how it will be effective. People want to feel like they belong, like they're part of something meaningful.
Exactly. And for a lot of people, especially those struggling financially or feeling lost in life, that promise of belonging and purpose can be very seductive.
So we've talked about the psychology, the social media tactics, the unsustainable business model.
Right.
What happened when the FTC started investigating Wake Up Now? Did they try to fight back?
They did, but the evidence was pretty damning. The FTC found that Wake Up Now was promoting a classic pyramid scheme where recruitment was prioritized over actual product sales. They were also accused of making false and misleading income claims, preying on vulnerable individuals, and using deceptive marketing practices.
It sounds like they were playing a dangerous game.
Yeah, they were.
Did they face any legal consequences?
Oh, absolutely. In 2016, the FTC filed a complaint against Wake Up Now, and they ended up shutting down the company. Several top executives were also fined and banned from participating in MLMs in the future.
That's good to hear. But what about the people who are involved in Wake Up Now? Did they get any kind of restitution?
Unfortunately, no. Most of them lost money. They had invested in inventory, paid for training materials, spent countless hours trying to recruit people into their downlines. And when the company collapsed, those investments vanished, and a lot of people were left with debt and a sense of betrayal. It's a sad story.
It's heartbreaking to think about how many people were affected by this. But it also raises a bigger question. If Wake Up Now was shut down, why are MLMs still around today? They seem to be more popular than ever.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part. You see, the MLM model is inherently flawed, but it's also incredibly adaptable. It's like a hydra, you cut off one head and two more grow back. And the companies themselves have become savvier about hiding their recruitment focus, making their compensation plans more complex, using more sophisticated marketing techniques to kind of evade regulations.
So it's this cat and mouse game between regulators and these companies.
Exactly. The FTC is trying to crack down on the most egregious offenders,
Yeah.
but the industry is constantly evolving and finding new ways to operate under the radar. And social media has only made it, they're analyzing your online behavior, figuring out who's struggling financially, who's expressing dissatisfaction with their job, who's actively looking for side hustles, and then boom, they hit you with a perfectly crafted message promising the solution to all your problems.
It's like they're reading our minds. It's a bit creepy. to be honest.
It is. And what's even more concerning is that they're using AI to generate content, create fake testimonials, and even automate conversations with potential recruits.
Really?
It's getting harder and harder to distinguish between real people and bots, which makes it even easier for these MLMs to manipulate and deceive people.
This all sounds incredibly sophisticated. Is there anything being done to regulate this kind of AI-powered marketing?
It's a relatively new frontier, and regulators are definitely struggling to keep up. There are some laws in place to prevent false advertising and deceptive marketing practices, but the use of AI makes it a lot harder to enforce those rules.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a wild west out there, and it's really crucial for consumers to be aware of the tactics being used against them.
So what can people do to protect themselves? Are there any red flags to watch out for?
Absolutely. The biggest red flag is always a focus on recruitment over product sales.
Okay.
If the emphasis is on building a downline and making money from recruitment, that's a huge warning sign. Also, be wary of any opportunity that promises, easy money or get-rich-quick schemes.
Yeah.
If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Do your research, ask critical questions, and don't be afraid to say no.
Those are great tips. But it sounds like MLMs are pretty good at making their pitches sound appealing. Are there any specific phrases or tactics they use that people should be aware of?
There are a few common ones. They often use phrases like be your own boss, financial freedom, unlimited earning potential, work from anywhere, and change your life.
Right.
These phrases are designed to appeal to our desires for autonomy, flexibility, and financial success.
Yeah.
But they're often empty promises.
Like they're selling a dream, not a realistic business opportunity.
Exactly. And they're also very good at creating this sense of urgency and scarcity.
No.
Oh, okay.
They might say things like limited time offer, exclusive opportunity, or join now before it's too late.
Right.
These tactics are designed to pressure you into making a decision without thinking it through carefully.
So it's all about emotional manipulation and playing on people's fears and insecurities.
In a nutshell, yes. MLMs are masters of persuasion, and they know how to push our buttons to get us to do what they want. But the good news is that once you're aware of these tactics, they become much less effective.
Right.
Knowledge is power, and the more you know about how these MLMs operate, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself and others from their harmful practices.
That's a great point. We've talked a lot about the negative aspects of MLMs, but I'm curious, are there any legitimate multi-level marketing companies out there? Or is the entire model inherently flawed?
That's a tricky question. There are some companies that operate within the MLM structure, but they do focus on selling legitimate products and offering fair compensation plans.
However, even within those companies, there's often a lot of pressure to recruit and build a downline, which can create some ethical dilemmas.
So it's a gray area. It's not always easy to tell which companies are legitimate and which ones are exploiting their members.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to do your due diligence before getting involved in any MLM opportunity.
Yeah.
Research the company, talk to current and former distributors, and make sure you understand the compensation plan and the risks involved. Don't just take their word for it. Look for independent sources of information.
It sounds like you're saying that even if an MLM company is technically legal, it doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical.
That's a good point. There's definitely a difference between being legal and being ethical.
Yeah.
And when it comes to MLMs, that line between the two can be very blurry. Even if a company isn't breaking any laws, they might still be engaging in practices that are harmful to their members or the wider community.
So how do we hold these companies accountable? Is it solely the responsibility of regulators to police the industry? Or do consumers have a role to play?
It's definitely a shared responsibility. Regulators need to enforce existing laws and create new ones that address the specific challenges posed by MLMs.
Right.
But consumers also have a crucial role to play. We need to be informed, discerning, and vocal.
Yeah.
We need to call out unethical practices, support organizations that are fighting against MLM exploitation, and just spread awareness about the risks involved.
It sounds like you're saying that change starts with us, the consumers.
Absolutely. We have the power to choose which companies we support and which ones we reject. We can vote with our wallets and make it clear that we won't tolerate businesses that exploit their members or engage in deceptive marketing practices.
That's empowering.
Yeah,
It's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about creating a more ethical and sustainable marketplace for everyone.
exactly. It's about shifting the culture away from this obsession with quick riches and easy money towards a more realistic and responsible approach to entrepreneurship. It's about building businesses that create value, not just for the owners, but for the workers, the customers, and the community as a whole.
I love that vision.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, if MLMs are so problematic, why are they still so popular? What is it about this model that continues to attract people, even in the face of all the evidence of their harm?
That's a complex question, and there's no easy answer. I think part of it is the allure of the dream.
Yeah.
MLMs tap into our desires for financial freedom, flexibility, social recognition.
Hmm.
They promise a lifestyle that a lot of people crave, especially in a world where traditional jobs are becoming less secure and the gap between the rich and poor is widening.
So it's about more than just the money. It's about the promise of a better life, a life of freedom and abundance.
Exactly. And for many people, especially those who are struggling financially or feeling stuck in dead-end jobs, that promise can be very seductive.
But that hope is often built on a foundation of lies and manipulation, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yes. The reality of MLMs rarely lives up to the hype. Most people who join MLMs end up losing money, damaging their relationships, and experiencing a great deal of stress and disappointment.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is.
We've seen how Wake Up Now exploited people's dreams and vulnerabilities, and it seems like the same tactics are still being used today.
They are. But as we've discussed, there are ways to protect ourselves and others.
Yeah,
We need to be informed, critical, and discerning.
right.
We need to ask tough questions, do our research, and not be afraid to say no to opportunities that seem too good to be true.
That's great advice, but it also feels like a bit of a downer.
Yeah.
Is there any good news in all of this? Are there any alternatives to MLMs that offer genuine opportunities for people who are looking for? We'll be exploring some of those ethical and sustainable business models in our next episode.
I'm looking forward to it.
But before we wrap up, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned today.
Yeah, I think that's important.
We've seen how MLMs like Wake Up now exploit people's dreams and vulnerabilities using sophisticated psychological tactics and aggressive marketing strategies to recruit members and generate profits.
Right, and we've discussed the devastating consequences of these schemes, both for individuals and the wider community. Financial losses, damaged relationships, emotional distress, the toll can be significant.
It can.
Yeah, but most importantly, we've talked about solutions.
Right.
We've talked about the importance of being informed, critical, and discerning consumers.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the power of saying no to opportunities that seem too good to be true.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the need to support businesses that operate with integrity and prioritize ethical and sustainable practices.
It's been a heavy but important conversation.
It-
And I hope that our listeners feel empowered to make more informed choices about the businesses they support and the opportunities they pursue.
I hope so too. Yeah, definitely. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground today. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the global impact of these companies. I mean, we know that Wake Up Now wasn't just a U.S. phenomenon, right?
Right.
MLMs often target countries with developing economies or weaker consumer protection laws. It's a pattern we see repeated, across the globe.
Why those countries specifically? Is it just about looser regulations?
It's partly that, but there's also a strong correlation between economic hardship and MLM growth. You see, they prey on people who are desperate for a better life, a way to escape poverty. The promise of quick wealth and financial freedom is even more alluring in places where, traditional employment opportunities are limited.
So it's almost like they're exploiting existing inequalities,
Yeah.
capitalizing on people's desperation.
Sadly, yeah, that's often the case. And what's even more insidious is that they often tailor their messaging to specific cultural values and beliefs. So, for example, they might leverage strong family ties in some cultures to encourage recruitment within families. Or they might exploit religious beliefs by framing financial success as a sign of divine favor.
It's like they're taking these deeply personal and cultural values
Right.
and twisting them to serve their own agenda.
Precisely. It's a form of cultural manipulation that can be incredibly effective. And because these companies are often operating across borders, it can be difficult for regulators to keep up and enforce those consumer protection laws.
It sounds like a complex and challenging problem. What can be done to protect people in these vulnerable communities?
Well, I think there needs to be a multi-pronged approach. First, Stronger international regulations are needed to hold these companies accountable for their practices, regardless of where they're operating. Second, we need more education and awareness campaigns, right, to inform people about the risks of MLMs and help them identify the red flags. And third, we need to support organizations that are working on the ground to provide economic opportunities and support systems for people who are vulnerable to MLM exploitation.
It sounds like a systemic issue that requires a systemic solution. But what about on an individual level? What advice would you give to our listeners, influence decoders, who might be considering joining an MLM or who might know someone who's involved?
The most important thing is to be informed. Do your research.
Yeah.
Don't just rely on the information provided by the MLM company itself. Look for independent sources, read reviews, talk to people who have had experience with the company, and be critical, right? Ask tough questions. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
And what about those who are already involved in an MLM? What advice would you give to them?
It can be difficult to step away from an MLM, especially if you've invested a lot of time, money, emotional energy into it. But it's important to remember that your well-being is more important than any business opportunity. So if you're feeling pressured or stressed or unhappy, it's okay to walk away. There are other ways to achieve your financial goals without compromising your values or your relationships. Reach out to a trusted friend or family member. Seek support from an anti-MLM organization. Or connect with a financial advisor who can help you explore alternative options.
That's really important advice. And I think it highlights something that we've been touching on throughout this whole episode, that there are ethical and sustainable alternatives to MLMs. There are ways to build a business and create income and achieve financial freedom without resorting to exploitation or deception.
Absolutely. There's a growing movement towards ethical entrepreneurship where businesses are built on principles of fairness, transparency, and sustainability. And there are countless resources available to help people start and grow their own businesses without resorting to those predatory tactics of MLMs.
So influence decoders, if you're looking for ways to make money online, don't despair. There are legitimate and ethical options out there. Do your research, be critical, and trust your gut. And if you encounter an MLM that raises those red flags, don't be afraid to walk away.
Yeah. And remember, the true measure of success isn't just about how much money you make. It's about how you make it. Building a business that aligns with your values, that treats people fairly, and that contributes to the greater good, that's something to be truly proud of.
That's a great point to end on. Influence Decoders, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the world of MLMs. We hope you found it informative and empowering. Remember, knowledge is power, and by sharing this information, we can help protect ourselves and others from falling prey to these harmful schemes.
And if you have any suggestions for future deep dives, please leave a comment below. We're always looking for new topics to explore and shed light on.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the world of online business and influence. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.